Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to the keepers and players of Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips and how you can apply them to your table. In this episode, we're again joined by actor and director Drew Shirley to discuss old school dungeon crawling and modern Cthulhu gaming. Welcome back, Drew.
Hey, thanks for having
Welcome,
me.
Drew.
Hey, what's up, John?
This is awesome. And this was a topic suggested by Drew, which Seth and I thought was pretty cool, so we were eager to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, as the header kind of suggested, this is about old school gaming, old school dungeon crawling, and then kind of mixing it or bringing in modern Cthulhu gaming mechanics, approaches, principles, that kind of thing. But let's first kind of define and get an idea on what is old school gaming.
Yeah, it's a pretty big jump. It's like that interesting, I don't know. I guess what got me interested is because I feel like there's something in old school gaming to me that really resonates with survival horror.
Sure.
That I think that, whereas when I think about the 5th edition, like current Dungeons & Dragons, I think more of celebrating heroic deeds, more like in the vein of like the Avengers. But when I think of like the older kind of earlier editions, and it could also just be the lens I'm viewing it through. But old school is like this celebration of the surviving the dungeon, getting through it, which is, not that unlike Cthulhu of the like just getting out of the horrific situation is a huge victory.
When it comes to the new editions, YouTube channel, Dungeon Craft Professor Dungeon Master, was finally able to nail what it was that I had been trying to put my finger on. And he compared the art between first edition AD&D and 5th edition. And when he was going through just the monster manual, it was like, pictures of, the rot grubs, and there's a guy looking on horrors. There's these things crawling in his arm, or a lot of them, it was the picture was the hero on the ground dead and the monster crouched above them, or the hero in immediate peril. But then when you looked at 5th edition, it was always, here's a big monster and here's somebody that's about to come kick its ass. And it was the heroes were never in peril in the new edition versus the old ones. It was the monster manual was like, here's all the stuff that'll kill you. And the newer one's more of like, here's all the stuff that you get to beat up. And that's kind of the difference, just even on the art level. So it kind of puts that into the reader's head as far as that imagery.
When you think about when those covers were created, or the big flashy art piece, how we've moved now to come live your heroic fantasy. Whereas before, I think old school, and the alternate that it now offers is this idea of like, come see this horrific, like come see this other thing, come see this wonder or horror. But it's not you. It is about you're experiencing something incredible, as opposed to that you are something incredible. You may become by leveling up, something awesome. But I think that's what got me interested in talking to you guys was like that there's this cool thing, exactly what you said about the art, that is a lot like Call of Cthulhu, where you're looking at people in peril in extreme situations. And so when I think of old school gaming, you kind of started this off, John, with like, what are we talking about when we say old school? I think another good example of the like, we're not getting experience, we're not leveling up by killing things. We're getting that by grabbing shit and getting out with it. Like, can we carry this heavy mirror somehow up 3 stories past the orcs? And if we can, then we level up. That's the reward is for ingenuity. The reward is for problem solving, which is not that different from like the really good Call of Cthulhu adventures, the ones that I love a lot, which is, I guess the big difference I would say then between Call of Cthulhu and Old School Essentials is like, which one is, I'd say maybe Cthulhu feels a little more railroady at times in its problem solving, whereas usually because an old school dungeon is built to be a toy that you can break. It's more open to how you change it. I kind of jumped all over the place there, but it's a topic that really gets me excited.
Well, I see, like with dungeons, there's not much. There's not a complicated plot.
Right.
It's usually like, here's a place, you got to get the mad wizard, rescue the prisoners or the damsel in distress, whatever. Get the stuff, get out.
Mm-hmm.
And with investigative games, there's usually like these casts of NPCs and all these social things, and you've got all these different approaches versus you have your mighty sword and your mighty shield. Let's go kick ass. That's part of the reason why I would say that Call of Cthulhu feels a little bit more railroaded in that sense, that you have a plot that requires more than just charge
Right,
in
exactly.
or
Yeah.
or straight ingenuity. It's the problems are not as I guess obvious. It's like not like crossing the chasm. You can see the chasm right
Right.
there.
It's exercising a different piece of your brain, of problem solving in your brain. That's like, it's just like genre of movie, the differences. And when done well, both can really be effective. But I think that, like, to me, is the real core of, and something I was thinking about, like, bringing to Cthulhu more and more, is like getting that problem solving and that ingenuity, that old school feeling of into my Call of Cthulhu games was really exciting to me to think about.
Right. It's kind of like a chocolate and peanut butter. Are you looking to have fantasy gaming with more Cthulhu mythos influence in that? Or are you looking to run a Cthulhu mythos game that has maybe more of a sandbox open world feel that you tend to get from a fantasy game, right? I mean,
Right.
it's where are you moving those sliders? How do you,
Yeah. Well, and
where's the
it's
emphasis?
fascinating with Cthulhu too, because like one of the big perks of playing that system is like the notes that are at the table that you hand across the way, or the picture of the famous figure that's from a black and white newspaper, and you need to have those props prepared. They're like beats that you're hitting in a story. And they're a huge reward port. They're incredible, but also they can tend to. It's like finding that balance of like a really, whose story is it? And I don't know. It just really fascinates me about, because I feel like that's why people play tabletop role playing games. Is what makes it different than a video game. Is that experience of, I do blank and GM responds blank, and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and that the openness of change and stuff is just so exciting, and the reason I show up to the table. And I think old school does that really well, and I think it's like the thing that's drawn a lot of people back to this kind of sensibility. I also don't know how much of it is like vinyl records or something, or like a niche thing where it's like it's more a memory of a thing than it is an actual thing at this point. But
Right, and there's so many players nowadays where the old school gaming, it is not hitting their memories because they weren't playing then, right?
no,
There are a lot of players like myself who were there in the 70s and there in the 80s, getting these games when they were brand new, when they were being published, and that was it. That's what we were playing. There weren't a lot of choices. The choices grew exponentially rather quickly. But yeah, in the last 10 years or so, I'd say there has been a resurgence in trying to return to the games, or at least the game mechanics that were popular in the 70s and in the early 80s. And I'm kind of wondering, why is that? I know the reasons why I enjoy, what I would term old school gaming, but Drew, what draws you to play in an old school fashion versus something more modern or more contemporary?
yeah, and well, it's that thing where, like, even just what you said, where I'm like, yeah, I'm that guy. Like, I didn't live through that. I had the black D&D box with the red dragon on it, with like the red folder and like the paper standees, and like ran it for my friends, but
Oh
didn't
yeah,
fully I was in middle school, or what, it was like
that was my
yeah,
first one, the
yeah, it
black
was
box.
amazing.
For sure.
But I'm definitely one of those who was like, I'm celebrating a memory I wasn't part of, or what I, you know what I mean. But at the same time,
Well, I'd say with something like D&D, there was the basic D&D was at the time, and I ended up when I got into AD&D. I had a GM was one of our dads,
sure.
so he was like, "I'm not getting new books. We're all first edition. Go to garage sales." So I got to experience all of those, playing them in the '90s, but they all came from used bookstores and garage sales,
Hmm.
or there were stuff that my dungeon master already had. But one thing though I always find kind of interesting when they talk about the old school Renaissance or old school revival, it's kind of always up for debate what the OSR and the R is in
Right.
OSR is. It's often said we're looking at we want to go back to the games of the '70s and the '80s, but Call of Cthulhu is is what, 82? And the 7th edition is is backwards compatible. So like you pick up the haunting and it's just the haunting
Right.
and you can run it. So it's like, one of the other games that I love playing is Traveler. Yeah, the current edition of Traveler is fully backwards compatible with 1977s, and I've run some of those 1970s adventures. So I said I consider those, if you're going by old school, as in like quite literally old school 70s, early 80s, and with those, when like the current edition is fully backwards compatible with the old one. I've got some new rules, but you can grab one of the old ones and go. I think the OSR thing is really just D&D,
Yeah.
because D&D in its current form is not backwards
Right.
compatible, unlike those others. That's why there's not really like an OSR movement for Call of Cthulhu. Of like, why don't we go back to playing Call of Cthulhu like we did in 1985? Like, well, we still do.
Right.
Or like, why don't we go back to playing Travel like we did in 1980? Well, actually, no, we still do. But D&D has gone through very, very huge shifts in its mechanics, and the principles that it goes by, and everything involved.
Hmm.
And so I think when people talk about like OSR, it's actually, it's not just old school gaming; it's D&D.
Yeah.
We want to go back to original, Holmes D&D, or like basic D&D, before we got into like, I guess the 2.5 and the 3 and 3.54, et cetera, when it was, damn it, when we had that go. So I was, I don't know, I always kind of found it weird, like when they talk about old school gaming, is it's the like, as I'm like reading a Traveler book,
Right.
and or if I'm updating one of the Traveler books to the new edition, which was like minimal effort really. So it's like, well, I do old school gaming, and they're like, no, 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 but dungeons. It's like,
Right.
oh well, like, no, no, the gold stuff. It's like Traveler's 77 and Call of Cthulhu's 82. How much?
Yeah.
How much older are we supposed to
Well,
be
it's like
getting
that
here?
fascinating thing from what you said too, of where it's like the identity, the literal identity of D&D changes and shifts based on the needs of the who's playing at the time. And when it starts as chainmail, it starts as a war game, becomes this other thing, but kind of a one man's crazed basement vision, and then goes to another thing, and then slowly becomes slightly World of Warcraft, and then goes backwards. And we kind of at this point become fifth edition, where it is really empowering improvisation. I don't know. It's like that really cool thing. Whereas when you do Call of Cthulhu, you're like, it kind of maintains its identity. It is the game that it is. It is. The rule set may change.
Well, one of the other differences, though, is if you look at what the other two games and D&D, what they saved versus lost, is mortality.
Mm,
The others, while they are skill based versus a level based, it wasn't. It didn't have an obsession with balance. Call of Cthulhu
right.
does not have
Right.
the obsession with balance. Neither does Traveler. If you want to drop down to a planet, and you've got power armor and a plasma rifle. Well, you got power armor and a plasma rifle, and the bad guys have rocks. So it didn't have that same thing that D&D had, where they wanted a fifth level character is just as powerful as any other fifth level character, and they kind of like really twisted stuff. Versus in the olden days gone by, that didn't happen. When you started off, usually your fighter was your tough one, and then somewhere around like fifth level or so, the cleric became like the really tough one. And then when you get to like the upper levels, that sniveling little wizard in the back who's only got a dozen hit points is suddenly like bending the universe
Right.
to their
Yes.
will. And a high level wizard is like way worse than anything. But there's like, it's kind of like you were the weak one for so long, but it's this long term investment. Like, this is going to pay off. Like, when I get fireball, dang it, they're going to see how powerful I can
Yeah.
be.
Then they'll
And
see. Yes.
and then they'll know. Until then, I'm going to hide in the
Yes.
back, and all I've got is magic missile, and I shoot one.
Right.
So I think that's the other thing that kind of changed, is that obsession with everything has to be perfectly balanced, and we don't want anybody to feel like they're getting too much, or they're not getting enough for the immediate balance.
Hmm.
Well, the older edition of D&D, like, balance was like this very long term thing,
Hmm.
where like, hey, if you want to be powerful up front, play a fighter.
Hmm.
Around seventh level, you're going to kind of pretty much crest.
Hmm.
And then the others go, and then thieves never became. They were at no point is a thief the most powerful person in the group ever.
Right. Right.
Uh, but it was just kind of like what you want. It didn't. I would always play a rogue, but they were never at any point going to be the most powerful person in the room. But they were just fun to play. So I think that is one of the things that a lot of OSR players want to go back to is the idea of these games really aren't actually perfectly balanced. So let's stop pretending and wasting a lot of energy on perfectly balanced at all times, and let's just get back to you want to play a thief because they're cool, and your wizard, if you can survive, is going to bend the universe to their will in the long game. Yeah, that's one of the big fundamental differences that have happened with that game over the decades.
So the way I have kind of seen and for myself defining OSR is it is a movement to return to gaming where the world is unpredictable and the world is dangerous. Your characters are fragile and bad things can happen. In original D&D, and I believe, if I recall correctly, this was even stated in like the player handbook was sometimes you need to run away. Sometimes you need to assess the situation and realize that's too powerful for me. And sometimes that's what the game masters were hoping for. They might stock a room and it just is ridiculously overfilled with orcs. It's not an invitation for you to wade in there and turn it into a bloodbath. The game master was hoping that the players would get to that room, take a peek, see that it was, overwhelming odds, and then figure out, oh, let's find the secret passage that goes around this, right? There's some other reward if we can, work our way around. But I think the OSR movement is to try and return to a gaming realm that is dangerous and characters could potentially die. It's interesting, I think, because in new games, games that are being designed with more modern design elements, in their games, like Merc Borg, that world has all these new modern, that game has all these new modern mechanics in it, but the world is super dangerous. Your characters are flawed and in some ways grotesque and can, easily die in those. And I think what makes this also a perfect soil for the seed of Cthulhu to be implanted into is that Cthulhu gaming is always dangerous. The monsters could come out and everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket, and that's old school gaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dungeon is dangerous. That castle is dangerous. The forest is dangerous, and there are Cthulhu mythos creatures living in there.
Yeah. I thought, when you were first just talking about what old school was to you, I was like, yeah, I want to play that game. That sounds awesome. But then I'm also like, that's not for everybody. I have a current group right now where it's like half of them, I think, are really into like what I'm talking about right now with this kind of stuff. The other half is really into the power fantasy at the moment. And both are valid and great and really have their place. But I'm really interested too in that, just as someone who loves Call of Cthulhu, but also is really into all these other RPGs, Blades in the Dark and Mothership and, whatever random stuff I'm trying that week. Like there's just so much you can draw from this kind of way of thinking that's so useful. I feel like at a role-playing table, because I think for me, it's like just about stakes. Like if I'm a director talking to an actor, it's the same, but like it's that thing of like, it's a role-playing setting with stakes. If we're all awesome, it's harder to tell a story that matters, in my opinion. Everybody has a different, vibe about that. But for me, I think that's part of my attraction to both old school sensibilities and Call of Cthulhu. is the feeling sometimes of the impossibility of success, the feelings of like how incredible a small victory can feel if it feels earned. Finding that one clue that can put me, moving forward.
Right.
I just think it's like this really attractive way of thinking about role playing that you can use in any system. That is this sensibility of like, yeah, the world is hard, and I think Morkborg turns that up to 11, right? And then
Yeah.
famously, so many other places have kind of mimicked it, but definitely its rule set still has a ton of old school sensibilities, and it's heavily inspired by old school. It's old school meets Mad Max, in my opinion. But like, it's like this just really fascinating. It's the same thing though. They start it with the world is ending. We don't know when, but soon. Like the stakes are just cranked.
Right. Right. Yeah. With whether you're an actor playing a role, a character, or you're a player playing a character, as the actor, as the player, it's easier for you to relate to what it would be like to have a small success, where you have hardships, and these small successes are very meaningful and drive your character's story arc further. It's easier to source that as a player and be able to react to that than it would be to, in my opinion, to have a character that is uber powerful, all these abilities available, and trying to be able to react. I'm not sure if believably is the right way to phrase this, but being able to react and take rewards and have them be meaningful, for a character who's, super, a supreme being and super powerful, right? What's it mean, for them to, find the secret door, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I just used my X-ray vision. Of course, I knew it was there. So it's so much easier, I think, for players to have these downtrodden and other characters that are, really working hard to excel and do more in life. Because that's what we do as real people. It's easier for us to source that and put that into our game.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that to me is just mortality. If the characters risk death, they do have that, and there are those endorphin rushes of I made it through.
Mm-hmm.
That encounter, because it could have killed me. Any a spider comes out. Oh my god, that could kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And do it now with things like just the dungeon crawls. The ones that I always enjoyed of the old AD&D ones, or back when we were just playing. We played AD&D until 2008. Like we had a short dalliance in third edition. I checked out and we went back to AD&D, which is our first second edition combobulation. And it was the mental puzzles
Mm-hmm.
of, you're in the room. There are 4 statues. There are 4 different colors, and you have to move them in the right spots. These weren't roll intelligence to get through the thing. This was, the players are often looking at the parts of the puzzle, and they have to figure out how to do it, how to get through it. And if they do it wrong, then a monster comes out or something like that. So there actually was a lot of that feeling of accomplishment, because we were having to figure out our way past all the obstacles, whether it was a crevasse or some puzzle. I always hated riddles, man. I
I have a hard time with riddles too.
like, man, there's this old adventure, the Maze of the Riddling Minotaur. My God, that sucked.
You need a riddle guy in the group.
Yeah, and we had one, and that was great. Except for the fact he was also the vocal one going, more riddles. And I'm like in the back, like, no more riddles. Stop. I'm terrible at these. It's one of the things where when you do look at, if you ever read any of the histories of Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot, Gygax loved the old pulps.
Mm-hmm.
Conan and Black God's Kiss and Fafhrd and Grey Mouser and all of that. And he actually wasn't a massive Tolkien fan.
Mm-hmm.
However, when D&D released, Lord of the Rings was like huge.
Mm-hmm.
And because they put like some fancy stuff to the back of a chainmail, and then all of that happened. So they really kind of gravitated more to the Tolkien-esque fantasy because that's what was popular. That's what people are selling. That's what they should have done. But they always leaned more onto Robert E. Howard type of stuff, which was usually your character is a mortal, and they are usually completely outmatched. That's what sword and sorcery
Right.
is the hero doesn't usually have magic.
Right.
The bad guy has magic. Conan or Fawford or whatnot are usually having to use their own wits
Yeah.
to beat the wizard,
Yeah.
because magic is dark and scary. Versus in the current kind of age of gaming, it's like magic is everywhere. Everybody's got a spell ability and whatnot,
Hmm.
and so it's a very different end of the spectrum.
Conan's such a good example. Like using Conan, because like you think of the 5th edition barbarian, and it's all about rage, and it's all about, and whereas like the old school, what a barbarian was like an outsider who had like some strange like shamanistic beliefs, who like wouldn't walk through open doorways, or always had to throw dirt over his shoulder, or like was a part rogue, like the weirdo outsider who could maybe do a little magic and also was a rogue and like had a lot, it was just like, it was a different sensibility. It was a different character.
Yeah, and with Conan in particular, Conan was a smart guy.
Right.
He was actually very, very smart, and because Howard wrote the stories all out of order, and if you read them in order, that means they're completely scrambled. Early on, it's like he's leading armies and whatnot.
Right.
He was a very brilliant guy, and that somehow that became dumb, rage-filled barbarian. So something got lost in translation through all that. But with those old sword and sorcery adventures, like the pulps from the 30s, it was a normal person, maybe of a magnificent physical prowess, who has to go against something that is uh, dangerous and unworldly. And so that's a lot of what D&D was based on,
Mm-hmm.
was that idea of you are outmatched, you must outwit this, or you must be completely aware of all of your assets at all times,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know which one is going to be important. And those were the types of games that I preferred when it came to fantasy role play. Is that sort of mindset, which is also why we would check out a D&D at a certain, like around like 8th to 10th level. I checked out. I was like, oh, they're just too powerful. Let's go back to let's get back to like 3rd.
Yep. That's the sweet
that
spot.
6th to 7th
Yep.
to me was like the magic moment, and then it like went quickly down. But that was because you were still very vulnerable, even if you could do incredible things.
Yeah, 2nd to 5th levels were always the sweet spot. Those were you were getting the best bonuses, and a healthy dose of spells, and it was just it was always great at that level. So I'm making the assumption, as we kind of pivot and move on a little bit here, make the assumption that everyone here at the table is a keeper, right? You're an experienced game master for Call of Cthulhu. So with that in mind, Drew, are there lessons that you've learned and have adopted from old school D&D or any other type of old school game that you bring in and utilize in your Call of Cthulhu game?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, Seth, when you were talking about the garage sales and playing at birthday parties and stuff, that was actually something that I try and use still. I'm thinking of my like birthday party when I was a kid, and my dad running for me D&D games. And I remember my dad was one of those dads, like when we play sports or whatever, he was like the loudest guy in the gym, and he sometimes got kicked out. And like my dad would, come to the sports event and like really he wouldn't yell at the other teams, wouldn't yell at the other players. He was just yelling at me. And my dad is not the type of like, he loved me. He thought a lot of me, but he wasn't going to like at the birthday party when he runs D&D for me, you better believe I'm the character that's dying. That doesn't mean he doesn't love me. That's just, that was my relationship with him, And
Right.
So what I remember from that, and what I'm thinking about is, playing really early, and we had a friend named Jerry, and Jerry would always play the rogues, and we would be down in the dungeon and all of us trying to do our thing, whatever that is. And Jerry would always be stealing from us or always be doing something to mess with us. And my dad totally allowed it. Just let him do his thing. And he was a rascal, and he still is to this day, lives in Florida and still, is a rascal there. But Jerry made D&D so exciting because of the, like, we were not only dealing with the relationship our characters had with the dungeon, but also the relationship our characters had between each other. And I still remember on a birthday, one of the other, like some middle school kid drowning the other middle school kid, his character, because he had stolen from him, stolen gold from his pouch. And like, I don't know, that to me, for whatever reason, that imprinted as what role-playing games are. And I'm sure in some ways that's really screwed up, but there's something about that like, I think I still use in old school gaming that's really helpful. About, like, if I'm running a Call of Cthulhu game, I think I try and do my best. My advice would be like, I focus on the mystery, but I think one of the most exciting things you can do is, what is the relationship between the characters, the people playing, and can you add conflict and a situation there?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny bringing up, the old playing, a D&D game or playing role-playing games, as a kid at a birthday party. I have that as well. I have one story that, or one session that sticks with me, because I was introduced to the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, first edition, by my friend Robert, and I remember, God, like it was yesterday. It was Robert's 13th birthday, and we played Call of Cthulhu. And there is I forget what the name of it is, but there is like a very short scenario in the original first edition book, and it was right next to the haunting. But this one dealt with like a house with caverns underneath, and the way it's written, because I have read it since then, the way it's written, it's got like deep ones and stuff underneath there.
Mm-hmm.
But when he ran it, he put serpent people. And so he had this, the house was laid out. And I remember it was one of those, just ridiculous setups, that only makes sense for 13-year-olds, where we were all survivors of like a voyage ship that was, going across the ocean, but it sank.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had gotten into a dinghy and we made it to an island. And on this island, of course, it's this house. And so we go into the house and explore it, and then we start hearing like drums and stuff in the caverns underneath. We go and explore that. That's when we encounter the serpent people, and then we're trying to run and get out. And Indiana Jones was huge, back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember all the characters had escaped out of the caverns back into the house, and somehow all the other characters made it out the front door, but my character went like up these stairs, and the stairs, they were like these grand interior stairs, and there was a giant chandelier kind of hanging over the foyer, and big picture windows up in front of the house, and I'm kind of trapped because serpent people are coming up both sides, and so I kind of, we cued the Indiana Jones theme. I'm like, I'm gonna leap from this balcony, hit the chandelier, swing off the chandelier through the window, land outside in the front yard, and then run and catch up with everybody else who's, they're all running for the dinghy, and basically we're trying to make it to the dinghy and then, get back out into the open waters.
Mm-hmm.
And so the game master, who was my, I think it was my buddy, or maybe it was his dad, said to make a couple of jump rolls. So I made the first jump roll to hit the chandelier and swing. It was successful. And then I fumbled the second jump roll. So when I went through the picture window and landed in the yard outside, I broke my ankles and just landed in a heap.
Yes.
And as I'm laying there in a heap, and I'm, yelling and reaching out for my buddies, I get swarmed by the serpent people, and then they leave me behind to die as they go to the dinghy.
Yes.
But those are, that's the that old school feel.
No, totally. You swung from a chandelier, and then you Cthulhu'd at the end. Your ankle shattered, and you were eaten. So you got both in there.
So I will, just as a side note for the listeners, I think due to technical difficulties, I think we've lost Seth. So it's just going to be Drew and I for the rest of the episode. Just wanted to. All right. I feel like we should have like one of those sound effects of a needle scratching across a record,
Mm-hmm.
and then we just like reset. So for those of you who may have noticed, we have had some technical difficulties, and Seth is no longer with us. He just was having terrible connectivity issues.
He's safe.
So
Just his recording. He's good.
yes, he's being very old school. He's actually he was inking dice with crayons.
Yeah.
So can't get more old school than that. So all right, so it's just Drew and I. We're gonna carry the torch and continue on.
Yeah.
So awesome. All right, so let's kind of push on a little bit more then. So
I have some actually useful shit. I was thinking real quick.
Yeah,
Just for like
yeah, go-
actually useful
yeah.
shit for like to take from old school essentials that you can put into your Call of Cthulhu games. I assume
Yes.
most of the listeners who are listening to this, you are probably Call of Cthulhu veterans. You're very aware of the two individuals who run this podcast, who they are, and you've probably played a number of other RPGs. So I would just say that what I'm saying is stuff you may already know, but what I think about. I think inventory management is something that old school captures really well. That could be an interesting dynamic that you can get into a Call of Cthulhu game, whether it's just like taking care of the MacGuffin correctly, or it is more about like finding ways to situate them with like a heavy piece of armor or something that they need to get somewhere else, and just watching them problem solve with inventory management. I think is something old school does really well. I think there also is something that we can take from that kind of problem solving thing I was talking about with Seth before, just this idea of like how much can we create problem solving as opposed to a railroad for our players in these games, and how can you create puzzles for them that have multiple solutions, especially when you're running out of an adventure. Are there areas you can pick out? One cool old school thing that I like that I'd like to steal for whatever I'm running is like this idea of like the players, if they come up with a solution, it can be right. It doesn't have to be the solution that you wanted it to be, whether that's a puzzle or another thing, or even a MacGuffin or thing that's going to affect your villain. I think that's a really interesting sensibility to use that can encourage your players to like be creative and get ownership of the story.
Yes, I want to jump in on that one because
please.
You're right. Player solutions, game masters should be incentivized to say yes. So if a player solution, if the players come up with a solution to a problem that you've proposed, say yes to that. But it is also, I think, essential to add the and. So it's a yes and.
Right.
So that yes, you are going to find a level of success with the solution that you've proposed. And maybe that unlocks a different problem or skews the current problem, or maybe there's a different reward that comes about it. But there needs to, I think this is, it's a continual flow, of adapting to the things that the players create. I can't tell you how frustrating it can be. I have been a player in games where maybe I'm patting myself on the back thinking that my solutions were super clever or something, right?
Right.
But I was at least proposing solutions where the other people in the party were not, giving solutions. And the game master, actually, I remember what it is now, and I don't want to put a full focus on it, but I was in a game.
Yeah, get him, vent.
No, but I was in a game, and I kept offering, because we needed to be able to talk to an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to be able to get in and basically have an encounter with this NPC, and it was one of those situations where the game master just absolutely, at least this was my perspective, and I could be wrong, but it felt like that he would absolutely not do the yes and.
Right.
Because I was not proposing the solution to get basically past the bouncer, right?
Right.
Past the door guy to get in and be able to see the NPC. I didn't propose a solution that was within the scope of what was going to be an acceptable scenario. But instead of saying yes and figuring out a way where, okay, I didn't do it in the most, or I wasn't proposing a solution that was the most beneficial, right? Or most expedient. It should have still gotten me in the door. It should have still worked, but it should have had consequences,
Right. Yeah.
maybe, because as always, as always happens in these games, the players are trying to find a way to bluff and bullshit their way through,
Right.
right?
Well, and
So,
yeah, well, I was just going to say old school, the consequence is the game in old school sensibility. Like that's what we're talking about. The
uh
consequence is the point. And it's like, yeah, he should have said yes. And then he could have given you the consequence and then you keep playing the game. And all of
yeah,
a sudden the story goes from his story or her story to the table story, which is the whole goal, which is like that people
yeah,
aren't sitting there looking bored. They all have ownership. And the way you create that is by it's that yes and that you said,
yeah,
and finding ways to create that situation where everyone feels like they are making decisions that create ripples. It's a hard job, but it's like
yeah.
when it works, it's
It
the best.
it is, and when it does, when the game master is able to use the designed scenario as a guideline and still take the actions and input that's
Mm-hmm.
happening at the table and work with it. That's when the players have, when it becomes invisible to them
Yep.
that you have either presented something that was scripted from the adventure, or you just simply ad libbed something that should be invisible to the players. And when it is invisible to the players, everything is just running smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
and when you don't have that yes and approach, when a game master does not do the yes and approach, it will stop the players. I was stopped. I mean, we literally in that session, our characters, because it was just my character and one other player's character, we basically kind of parked outside and we waited. As we were like, we would tell the game master when, as he was going around the table and trying to get input from all the other players for the different vignettes that they were in, because they were in different locales. When
Mm-hmm.
he'd come back to us, we were like, well, we're going to be kind of brainstorming and trying to and eventually the game master was finally proactive and said, well, the bouncer comes out and talks to you.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, well, we already, but okay, now we're gonna have a conversation. Okay, finally, and it felt as if there was just a give up, and
Right.
that was a kind of a bad session.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. And like nobody's perfect and those are going to happen to everybody in these sessions and you're going to run out of ideas as a GM, but like just trusting that sensibility I think is so important. And like honestly, from that question that you started all this off with, I feel like that's like the best, what you said is like the best piece of advice. It's that idea of like taking this old school sensibility into a scripted sequence, because you're always playing, not always, but a lot of time with these Call of Cthulhu adventures, you're playing a scripted sequence of events and adventure that can go different ways, but there's a story we're telling here. And what can you do to give the characters agency, which makes it feel like they matter and makes them feel like, and the way you do that is taking their answers and saying yes and like that's the old school sensibility I'd want in my Call of Cthulhu games.
Yep, I hear you. I hearken that. Okay, so let's turn that around then. So let's make the assumption that you are playing either as a player or as a game master. You're running old school fantasy games.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any lessons learned or any approaches that you would use in a Call of Cthulhu game that you would want to use in that type of
Yes.
older game?
Yes, I would take everything. I feel like for me, it's
Everything.
like Call of Cthulhu is like just dripping with the things I want in my like old school dungeon crawls. I think that's it's such a great resource. And like, I hope that my hope is that there's some listener like that like has never tried old school but has run a bunch of old like Cthulhu games that gives this a shot, because there is something about like just this crawling around in the dark vibe of like wonder and horror that you're trying to engage with that is not unlike a Call of Cthulhu game. The idea that in my version of this like fantasy realm, when you run into an orc, it is not like, oh, that's an orc, we've seen those before. It is this strange and incredible thing that you don't have a name for. And that is how it should be described by the GM. That's a troll, that's a gelatinous cube. All of those things are not that anymore. They are more akin to a horror, a Call of Cthulhu monster from the void. And that like when Gygax and all these guys were talking about like the mythic Underdark, it's this idea of this place where the rules are different. They're not how they are on the surface. And the world is not the world that you knew. The things down here operate on an entirely different level, have their own cultures, languages, society. And like, it is so like, it is a mythos. It is this other, it is other. And it's like that really, you have, if you're a Call of Cthulhu player or a game runner, like you have all this experience in that kind of mindset and world. And like, that like wonder and horror of the great tentacled creature kind of rising up from the ocean, to me that's the same vibe that I'm interested in with four level 1 guys with just enough torchlight kind of working their way through and then stumbling upon a room. I think that is, and I also think it's a lot of the reason so many people are like rushing towards old school. I think in a lot of ways they're looking for Call of Cthulhu, don't know it, and like it is like more adjacent, close to the thing they know, but they're looking, it's a different kind of escapism where you kind of go from hero to unlikely hero possibly, but like it's also this thing of what was exciting about fantasy was exploring a world that didn't make sense and learning its rules and then
Yes.
revisiting it. Like that's why we go to a Harry Potter movie, even though it's bad. We like enjoyed the books. We want to revisit that world. It's the same thing with the Lord of the Rings movies. We want to just be there again, and we want to relearn its rules. And Call of Cthulhu has so much of that. But that's what a dungeon crawl can be. It can be a strange journey into horror and the unknown and wealth beyond these peasants' dreams, and
Yep.
hopefully more wealth than they could ever carry out. And to carry
Yeah.
it out is terribly dangerous. Like for me, I am like, take everything from Cthulhu. Take the mystery, take the investigations, take the fascinating, multifaceted NPCs. Use all that shit that you already have from running all these games. I don't know. It's like it's like my ideal. Obviously, you can hear I'm getting like excited about it, but it's like my ideal. I think that's so exciting.
I do too. You said something interesting where people are they don't even realize that they're looking for a Call of Cthulhu game, especially people who might be new to the hobby itself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It is. So I find it surprising because I guess being an old fart, I just assume that if you play RPGs now, you play RPGs, and if you don't play RPGs now, you're never playing RPGs.
Right.
But surprisingly, we really are getting the hobby is gaining more and more players, and I bet you're right that there are players out there who are, well, they don't even realize that they are looking to play Call of Cthulhu. And I don't know why people, I guess, are sometimes intimidated by the Call of Cthulhu role playing game. I'm not sure why a level based system game, a D20 based game, has conceivably, I guess, is considered to have a lower threshold for entry than
Mm-hmm.
a percentile skill based system. I don't know. For me, rolling percentile dice and having that statement of I have a 40% chance to succeed at this skill,
Mm-hmm.
that just seems intuitive to me versus I need to roll this die and get a target number or higher. I guess they're both fairly simple, but supposedly the rolling a die to get a target number is more easy. I don't know. But
Yeah.
you're right. I think if we can bring more Call of Cthulhu into these, other games, that maybe it will start pulling more people into Call, because I think people inherently enjoy, people like to be scared,
Yeah.
we instill this in children when we play peekaboo,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's your first taste of horror when someone flashes their face suddenly and it's the jump scare.
Mm-hmm.
Boo, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like to be scared. We enjoy horror, that it does something to us. And there's something very visceral about uh playing Call of Cthulhu, reading the literature, and just being experienced in that realm.
Yeah, I think,
Um,
my 3-year-old loves Halloween YouTube videos. It's like her favorite thing. And it's a little, it's a lot sometimes, but I was just thinking, like, they love it kind of early. But I was just thinking about the idea that, like, with D&D or one of these, there's also that thing of, like, people kind of innately understand what they're supposed to do. There's a feel, even if they've never played a role playing game, like they understand like the culture of Lord of the Rings or the basic conceit of I'm a hero with a sword, go smash things. I think it might be harder for people to innately understand the kind of, well, this is a horror game where like you're going to eventually go crazy and things are going to kill you, and it's the end result is never a net win. And like it's an interesting, like, not interesting sell, but it's an interesting, people don't have as many models to look to of like what this experience is supposed to be.
yeah, I think the maybe one of the problems is when people try to do the Call of Cthulhu sell with that pitch,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the pitch of Call of Cthulhu is a game of mysteries
Yeah.
and investigation
Yeah.
and solving those mysteries with the Damocles sword, that's hanging over you
Yep.
in those mysteries, is that there are monsters that might be coming out of the shadows at you. I think that is a better pitch because
That is a good
now
sell.
people are invested in mysteries, and they want to be, the detective that solves the crime and finds the answer,
There's
and
been a huge
that kind
boom
of
in
thing.
those, like people ordering the mail-in kits where you get to do your own mystery. Like that's a huge,
Right?
it's its own industry. Yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
100% right, both with the Sword of Damocles and the idea of that it's about a mystery. I think that's a really, like, a beautiful sentiment, and also like a really important marketing point that like Cthulhu might consider. That, like, I don't know, it's like because there is a huge audience, that wants that exact thing.
And that would be a piece, I think, that could also be brought into, if you are playing old school, fantasy gaming, is bring a mystery in. Have
Yes.
your players solve a mystery. Have them do an investigation. Something that I do also wish, and I'm not sure if I've found the right mechanic for it, but maybe not a sanity mechanic per se in fantasy,
Oh
because
man, but yeah.
because having that sanity mechanic which is implying that your characters, your fantasy heroic characters, or pseudo heroic,
Hmm.
just kind of trying to be survivalist. But with that sanity mechanic, you might be implying that you could potentially lose some agency, lose some control. So maybe not a sanity mechanic, but maybe a fear mechanic of some
Mm-hmm.
sort,
Mm-hmm.
where if your fear escalates to certain levels, it will apply certain penalties, and have the penalties be low at first, but then depending upon how great your fear goes, your penalties that you're accruing, maybe it's a penalty to hit, penalty, to, I don't know, but maybe it's it makes it more difficult for you to attack your monsters. Maybe it makes it more difficult for you to
Maybe it
escape from the
makes life
monsters or
rougher
something.
outside the dungeon. Maybe it makes
Makes the life, makes it
a
more,
little
yeah,
harder to
makes it
hang out with the shopkeepers because you're a little unsettling.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah, no, I think
yeah.
sanity and luck are the like home run winners of this audition. When I look at Call of Cthulhu, I think that making luck finite is like just such a cool mechanic and like a
Oh yeah,
spendable resource.
it's a spendable resource. That it's a commodity.
And it just
You
makes
can
so much,
spend that luck.
yeah, it just makes so much sense. And it like you can sink your teeth into that conceit. Like that tells you what this game is. There's a
Yeah.
finite amount of this and it's going to run out, but
And I
you
love the
burn it all.
spiral. The
Yeah.
when you start that downhill slope of spending your luck,
Yeah.
it's a downhill spiral, and it's awesome.
It's
I
so,
love.
and it's all their agency. Whereas you were talking about sanity
Yep.
or fear being that thing of like, where you're like, I want to do sanity because you're right. Every D&D session would be better with sanity, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you don't want to take away agency. You're also right.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas luck, you literally let them do it to themselves, and like that is
yes,
chef's kiss. That is like,
yes. They step right up and spend it. Yep. Here, take my money. I'm gonna spend that.
You're
luck.
good for today. You're good for today. Yeah, it's
Yep.
it's just like it's so thematically appropriate and gorgeous. And I think you're right that like if there could be something that you could put into your old school game of that idea of, or just any RPG of that idea of the cost of being in the dark or the cost of being in these dungeons. I mean, that's definitely that Darkest Dungeon video game just is soaked in that there is a mental weight and cost to these repeated violent experiences and isolated experiences. And you are not the same person when you come out. That was actually going to be another thing I was going to say for the, like, what I would put into my Call of Cthulhu from old school is like, so much of old D&D is about like, you're a higher level and it's kind of boring to, go in the dungeon now. So now it's about like the barracks, like keeping your barracks up, or the village that you bought, or like you're running like it's and I think there's something to take from that into Call of Cthulhu, almost in the inverse. It's like, I'd love to meet these characters like 2 years later, like, or of how the weight. I'm always really into that, like in detective novels, like the weight that these characters carry of just the knowledge of, my father's best friend is a detective and he mostly worked child cases, and like the knowledge that comes with trying to live in that world and in his case help people, but seeing so much darkness of what we're capable of. I mean, it's the same thing with these Cthulhu characters where, how are they changed? How are they, that's why I think so many are alcoholics and like have different, issues. And I think there's something to be said of that, of like, can you take a look at old school's version of like, there's time off, and what does that look like, and how do these characters evolve, and can you play a new series of sessions a year later where that character looks totally different? That to me is really exciting and would make me want to play a campaign.
Yep, I agree. That's good stuff. Good stuff. I wanted to. I had heard a little bit about something that might be coming up soon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about something, Drew?
Yeah. Okay. So, we get along good, and we had a great time talking last time. And I wanted to hop on again because part of coming on here and talking about this, like thematically, the kind of blend of old school essentials and Call of Cthulhu. I have a Kickstarter coming up this summer, and it's called "You Carry the Fire," and it's an adventure for a new, basically old school system called Shadow Dark that raised about a little over $1 million and is one of these, what would I call it? Like old school essential darlings, made by a really cool creator, who, again, all of these old school, whether it's old school essentials, Shadow Dark, or Mothership, they're all kind of reframing a toolkit, but doing interesting things with it in interesting ways. And her thing was, some of my favorite pieces of her rule set is, Torchlight lasts an hour of real world time. And you have a finite inventory and no one has dark vision. So based on your strength, you kind of have so much room in your backpack, And then, every torch takes up a slot, and that torch is going to act for like 1 hour of real world time as you do your dungeon crawl. So with all that said, I was like, can I take that and can I create an adventure that kind of plays on what I view as the biggest strengths of Shadowdark? And so we've created this adventure, me and a team, called You Carry the Fire. And it is about, I would say it's a mixture of kind of the old school sensibilities that we've been discussing tonight and the movie Pitch Black, with the idea that like the darkness is constantly trying to kill you. The characters are doing, the inverted dungeon. As opposed to going into the dungeon, you start in the middle of the situation and you're just trying to get back to the light, trying to get to the surface. And the dungeon is doing its damnedest to kill you. I think if you're into Call of Cthulhu, you would really like this. I think if you're into old school gaming, you'd really like this. And I think it's a really neat blend of the two that really kind of, this adventure can really empower the Shadowdark toolkit and rule set. The underground facility is very much based in the kind of things we've been talking about tonight, with the idea of like mythic horror and wonder, the mythic underdark, the unknown, with all kinds of strange and insane experiences that are both like sublime and terrifying. And it's also, it's got a cool little backstory where it's you kind of get where the villain's coming from, and you kind of hate the good guy, and it's complicated. At least that's the hope. I don't know how invested. You can't control a table, which is what we've been talking about tonight. All you can do is say yes and. But we're trying to kind of set the table to give people that kind of what I kind of see as like the ideal Cthulhu or like Ravenloft experience, which is like, look at all of these cool kind of toys that all make sense, like an ecosystem, and live together. And how do you kind of go in there and knock things over? And the main thing is kind of, it's a series of really wonderful, exciting puzzles and rooms and situations that are all kind of based around the idea of torchlight. And it's kind of finite nature and trying to just stay in the light and get to the next room until you can find a way to the surface.
That sounds really, really entertaining. I'm intrigued.
Oh, cool. Well, it's called You Carry the Fire. It's going to be on Kickstarter this summer. I think I think Call of Cthulhu players would really enjoy it, being a huge fan of Call of Cthulhu myself, but also I think it's really been interested in this huge boom in the old school essential scene, and like, what do I have to say in that kind of thing? And I think that the kind of finite nature of what you can carry, what you can use to get through, is both really cool symbolically and also something really exciting and simple to deal with at the table. Everyone knows it, and there's that cool kind of ticking clock that we're all dealing with. The rule set system is slim enough that the game can kind of just keep moving. And hopefully there's a really cool like moral question at the end of it that's exciting and interesting to players, that definitely kind of lends itself to more of Call of Cthulhu and the nature of kind of, when we go into the dark, we don't come out the same kind of situation. And kind of fun. One last thing I would say is it's a level 0 adventure, which a lot of players may not have had that experience yet. A lot of DMs have maybe never ran one of those. They've kind of, level 0 adventures, I feel like, have kind of reached their heyday with like Dungeon Crawl Classics, that RPG. But it's kind of this idea that we're all just folk. Like, you're running around with the candle maker and the beekeeper and the guy who makes wine, and you're down there. And they're not the level 1 fighter yet. They're going to become that. And they're going to become that here, or the level 1 whatever. But it's like the story of how you become heroic. Like, it's the thing that really matters to me. Like, the wonder and the incredible shit is the stuff you see. And a lot of these characters are going to die. But the ones that make through, that guy who has the scar on his chin, Regdar, who was just the chef, now is a level 1, rogue or whatever, and he has a story.
Yeah, it's funny because in Dungeon Crawl Classics, they call those level 0 adventures funnels.
Funnels, yes.
Because you put, every player, every human player is running 4 of these, level 0 guys, because the assumption is that you're going to lose 3 of them.
Right.
And 1 will come out on the other side. So
yeah, that's kind of the design intent. Shadowdark has a version called the Gauntlet, which is very like a heavily modified, but not that modified. Like, if we're being honest, it's a take on Dungeon Crawl Classics with the idea of kind of a constantly rotating cast coming in as they go through the funnel. I mean, the adventure literally starts on a pile of bodies where something is eating it from the bottom.
Nice.
It is very much designed to be that. And it's interesting. It's like all our talk about like power fantasy versus the other sensibility. And that isn't everyone's cup of tea, which is okay too. But it's the thing I'm really excited about right now. And I think it's going to be something special. So it's called You Carry the Fire. It'll be on all the Instagram and all that stuff soon, like next week. But it'll be up by the time this is produced, I'm sure. And then this summer, you can look for us in June, July to be coming up on Kickstarter, and it'll be finished when it's on Kickstarter. So you can like order it and know that when the Kickstarter completes, you get your PDF. And if you want to order the hardback or the softcover, that's on the way through Drive-Thru RPG. So
that's awesome. Yeah,
the thing's done.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, when this is ready, give me the link and we will share it on this channel, on our Facebook and the Discord, and I'm sure it'll be included in the YouTube videos that Seth does for this. So awesome, please.
Yeah.
Well, Drew, I had a great time. Listeners, if you've got a topic that you want to talk, about, and you want to talk about it with Seth and I, if Seth's equipment's working,
he's available.
If he's available, write to us. Let us know, just like Drew did, and we'll have you on the show, and let's do an episode together. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Drew, I had a great time with you. Thank you so much,
man. Thank you for being so generous with your time, John. You're incredible, and Seth will hear this at some point. But like for me, as a D&D lifer, watching his YouTube videos was the thing that made me like brave enough to try and run a Call of Cthulhu game.
That's awesome.
Change my game. So as you're working on this project, John, and putting these podcasts out, just know that there's probably some like 16-year-old kid listening to this right now who's like learning about all this stuff from you right in this moment. And he's going to try it, and that you're helping people tell stories. And that really,
thank you.
Really matters. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so welcome to the fold through Seth's videos.
Right.
Well, let me bring this to a close and say that we cannot do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mahafa and Edwin Nagy, for their hard work and keen skills in making us sound awesome. We also want to thank John Sumrow for our badass Modern Mythos logo. He's an incredibly talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook, check out his official website, and consider joining his Patreon account. We'll have links for all of that in the show notes. And finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you are a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, you really need to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Check out their Bandcamp site and their official band site. We'll have links to those in the show notes. Drew, thank you again so much. Everyone listening, thank you.
You rock, John. Thanks.